I'd like to introduce Dr. Peter Lindemann for the KeelerNet conference. But first, Norman was talking specifically about you cannot close the loop on free energy machines. This is something John Bedini talks about. Everybody says the same thing. Think about this. If we're talking about tapping ether zero-point energy, and it's a pressure that's all around us, and it's uniform, except it pops in and out of existence in localized places, you're trying to concentrate that pressure in one area. So if you cannot close the loop because you must maintain a difference of potential, high to low. That's the only way you're going to get energy flow. So if you're standing in the local environment, it's all pressurized, so you'll never be able to close the loop unless you go far enough away where it's also a lower pressure, and then you'll be able to close the loop. So Dan calls this a gradient field, which is what that is, a gradient field. It's grayscale 1 to 100. Okay, Norman also mentioned the Dottle ring at 30,000 amps. That's an interesting connection between a medical device and a free energy machine. And that's what we do. We correlate and we network. And that you see there's linkages with all this mess. Okay, Peter's going to come up here and give his presentation on the gray power conversion tube and on the world of free energy. Peter Lindemann. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. If you can, I pretty much got transparencies here for this presentation. What we want to do here, the first image here is to orient us all. No, that is the first image. First image here is a rephrase, my concept of President Bush's new national energy policy. But if we could see the light at the end of the tunnel, here's what it might look like. Push it down so we can see the top. There we go. This article appeared in the National Tattler. It was written by Tom Valentine in 1973 after he visited Ed Gray's laboratory in Van Nuys, California. And this article I ran into on a bus trip in Battle Creek, Michigan. I ended up personally seeing 2 copies of the National Tattler in my entire life. This issue and the one that had the follow-up article on Ed Gray. I considered that rather auspicious since I never saw the publication again. But what I wanted to, what was so important to me about this particular article was this section down in here, in this article here, where he's talking about this circuit that ran on cold electricity and where Tom Valentine was able to put his hand in a bucket of water with the light bulb and not get shocked. This obviously was something that was completely different and new, that you can't do that with ordinary electricity. And that's what fixated my attention on this, that there was some genuine phenomena going on here that was unusual and important. And it had nothing to do with the motor. That's what was so important that stuck in my mind. And which is why I continued to search for the answers of what this technology was. If you want to go to the next slide. This was the second article that came out. Miracle No Fuel Electric Engine can save public $35 billion a year in gasoline bills. And this talks about the motor. And just to show that this is a photograph again from May of 1973. And again here you can see in this thing he's got these pulleys off to these big generators. I'm going to show you a piece of information from Ed Gray on a test procedure that he did, and you can see exactly where the energy is coming from and what he's doing to get rid of energy. He's really got so much energy in this system that he's dumping it and throwing it away wherever it's coming in ways that he can't use it. But I just wanted to show you that essentially the way he closed the loop on this was with external generators, because most of the free energy showed up as mechanical energy. Go ahead to the next one. This is a sequence of proof sheets that I got from Tom Valentine. And just to show you a few of the images, here's Tom with his finger in the water with the light bulb. Here's Ed running the free energy circuit that doesn't have the motor in it. You can see in the background here in some of these photographs, all tons and tons of math on the chalkboard. They're just trying to figure out what the heck they've got, and they're trying to explain it to themselves using Ohm's law and all kinds of standard formulas, and hopelessly lost in all of this. Here's some of here's the classic image of the repeller magnet here. The magnet's a couple feet off the ground. Here you can see the math on the board here behind Gray. He definitely knew how to do this, but they really had no idea how to explain it. Go ahead. Here we have, and you can see in this picture here and in this picture here, this is the number one machine that was built in 1961, and you can see with Ed's smile here, this is the one he's so proud of. This is the big breakthrough. And again, here's Fritz Lenz with the magnet repelling. This is an earlier version. Obviously, the repeller discs that Norm's showing here are a later version. They're much larger. But here they're popping magnets that are about the size of the ones that are in the motors. But you can see that there's a tremendous amount of work being put into these things even in the early years. And multiple models. Everything that you see in these photographs was confiscated by the DA's department in Los Angeles in 1974, and he never got any of these materials back. That's why almost everything that you've seen on the table up here looks different than a lot of these designs. He never got any of these materials back. Go ahead. So here's the basic cover sheet for the motor patent, and again, down here in the schematic, if you want to run it up just a little bit here, he's basically showing that he's taking power out of one battery. He's running it through his switching circuit. He pulses these things through a transformer and charges a battery bank. Then he says he discharges these things through his magnets and puts it back in the batteries. And but there's this unusual little thing here he calls his magnetic harness floating static flux field, which of course nobody knew anything about. And the converters are just diodes. But basically this patent protects the idea of the repeller motor and the collapse and the recapture of the collapse of the inductor when it's turned off, but does not discuss the circuit which actually powers the machine. So everybody got this patent. This issued in 1975, and of course nobody could duplicate his technology from this because it doesn't produce cold electricity. Go ahead. Here's the picture that cracked it for me. I got this from Tom Valentine. You can lower it a little bit. But basically this motor right here may well be the one we're looking at here. It very well could be this motor. What you can see here is the circuitry that he ran all this thing on. This one says EMA 6 right there, the little plaque right there. He may have called it number 4 on the inside, whatever else, but anyway, this is what he considers. This was the first machine he built after he recovered from his first round of legal problems, after the DA couldn't make any of his investors press charges, and the charges of grand theft and fraud were all dropped because, of course, there wasn't any, except, of course, the DA stole everything. Should have charged themselves. But this photograph was first printed in a magazine that Tom Valentine put out called Newsreel. It was in black and white form. But this photograph is one of the things that cracked the secret for me. And if we can go to the next thing here. Here we have a document from Ed Gray. You can lower it a little bit because there's space on the bottom here, yeah. And again, it says here, this is very important because we kept seeing these references to something else that was not mentioned in the motor patent. And here it says, development of a high voltage DC power for operation of the EMS motor incorporates a specialized high efficiency, high frequency inverter developed by Ed Gray Enterprises. And that its operating frequency is 6,000 cycles, etc., and that he can run other various types of appliances just with the inverter. So here again we have evidence that he was not just he's not just dumping capacitors into coils, and that's not the technique of the machine. Go ahead. Okay, make sure we get this over there. There we go. Okay, now here is a diagram by Ed Gray on the EV4 motor. EMA4 motor, which is this one, the one we've got here. This shows the energy economy of the system. Now, basically, he's claiming he's taking 1,584 watts out of the battery. Okay, he's cranking it up to his high voltage conversion, and he's storing it in his big caps over here. Then he is applying it to what he calls a high voltage ionization. Okay? Then from here, not from the motor, from here, the recycle directly back to the battery. And he's only taking 672 watts from here back to the battery. Then this phenomena is what drives the motor. And from the motor, he's using this generator. He's driving a generator, and he's putting 396 watts back into the battery. And so this is where you get, he's taken 1,500 out, and he's putting about 1,000 back in. And this gives you this idea. See, he's even saying he's putting 68% back into the batteries for regeneration. Okay? And that's where these ideas that, you know, he can make the thing run 4 times longer and all this kind of stuff. But of course that completely ignores the fact that he's getting 4,000 watts mechanical out of over here. That's incidental. So whether or not this was an over-unity machine is not a mystery, it is not a controversy, it is not unknown. That's all not the way it is. Okay? And even in these low-power tests, this device was able to produce just about as much energy as he wanted. Basically, this figure is specifically reduced because when this motor is running at 3,600 RPM, and you can see that he's running 3 pulses per second, or 3 pulses per revolution, excuse me. Basically, these things were designed, his whole system, the recharge and the discharge of the conversion tubes were designed to run at 6,000 cycles a second, which is 360,000 impulses a minute. Okay? This is the rate at which he's producing 60 to 100 amp pulses that are going to go back on the battery. 6,000 a second. 6,100 amp pulses back to the battery. There isn't a battery known today that can handle that kind of, charging. And we'll see what he did, and this is why we know he was just throwing away energy all over the place, because he didn't really know how to recover it. It's not that the energy wasn't there. Go ahead. So I was constantly on the lookout for other patents that Ed Gray may have filed. I heard a rumor in 1997 that other patents had issued, but nobody knew the numbers and anything. And in the summer of 1999, the former, what's now Delphion Intellectual Property Network, which was at that point the IBM patent site, was just upgrading their search engines, and I just said, well, let's see how well it works. I'll just type in E.V. Gray. And these two patents pop up. Here's the one, efficient power supply suitable for inductive loads. This is the circuit that he uses that powers the motor and everything else he did. Go ahead, next one. This is the enlargement of the circuit itself. And as you can see, he's got, he shows a number of things on here which are, of course, are superfluous, including plugging the thing into an AC line, which, of course, you can't recycle any energy if you're doing it that way. But he shows the two battery system here. One battery that he takes the power out of. He raises the voltage, rectifies, charges his capacitor here, discharges it through what this component is, which turns out to be his conversion tube, and back to the battery. And then the output from this is what runs the inductors, which also go back to the battery. Go ahead. This is the second patent that is directly related to the first one. These two patents are about 4/5 of the wording in the body of these two patents is identical. This is efficient electrical conversion switching tube suitable for inductive loads, and it is the device that is meant to be run by his circuit. You want to go to the next one. This is the close-up of the internal workings of the conversion tube, and we'll go into exactly what this is, how it works, and what effect it captures that is the free energy. But essentially what he's doing is he's got an enclosure here. His DC capacitor discharges are coming from the hot plus here, entering the tube, jumping a spark gap here, going through what he calls a resistor, which happens to be just a piece of carbon, and then off to a diode and his the part of the circuit that controls when this fires. And then when he shuts this off, the voltage, there's an explosion of electrostatic energy around the high voltage electrode. And this, he picks up on these grids here, and these are wired out and run his motor. Go ahead. So as I studied this patent diagram, since this was the magic free energy thing, and this is where this is the circuit that allowed this component to produce free energy, I looked at this for hours and hours and hours trying to figure out what the heck was going on here, because it was totally foreign to me. And I started noticing some very unusual things about this, and so just to kind of help my own understanding, I started taking things away from this drawing that I knew weren't a part of the main idea of what needed to happen. So what I did was, the first thing I did was I took away the alternate possibility of running it on AC. And then I realized over here, this was an interesting component which was designed to overcome overshoot. In other words, if the circuit produced too much energy, this was a kind of a safety spark gap mechanism that he put in there just to dump energy in case the system produced too much. Boy, what a problem. So, but there was also another very interesting thing about this particular component, and that is the fact that these lines are connected right through here, which I don't know if he did this on purpose just to goof with us or anything, but obviously if you take this diagram literally, there's no way to charge this cap, of course, because it's got a dead short around it. So I knew that in spite of the fact that that's the drawing we're given, The patent text clearly says that that cap is being charged to 3,000 volts and being used to discharge across this gap and so on and so on. So I knew that there were irregularities presented here. So the other irregularity that I could see is that this is clearly the image of a triode, a vacuum triode. The device is described in the patent as a one-way gate. And of course there's nothing here that represents the grid and how to control the grid on this thing. So I just said there's too much missing here. We need to still understand why, if this thing is doing what it's supposed to do, what effect is this thing capturing? It was still completely foreign to me, but I was able to kind of boil the whole thing down to taking all these extra safety features out and the redundancy of the control here and the extra AAC thing. I ended up with this circuit here, which I call the simplified gray schematic. And in these situations, I was using schematic. In the text of my book, I talk about a schematic because it's not really a schematic. There are things about it that are non-schematic, especially in including the fact that when he wants to show an inductor, for instance, this is an inductor transformer here, this is an inductor transformer here, but then he comes out to the load inductor here, but there's no circuit path, there's no coils drawn, there's no nothing here. So this is obviously a block diagram arrangement of some sort. So it's not really just a schematic. This is schematic, block diagram, combination, and and again, he's doing this to protect his ideas, not to reveal them. Next. Ultimately, I came to the understanding of what was going on by reading Jerry Vassalato's book, Secrets of Cold War Technology, where he, in chapter 1, describes all of the experiments which led Tesla to the discovery of radiant energy, and what happens when a sharp, high-voltage direct current discharge is interrupted abruptly. You get this particle emission, which contains charged particles that will charge other surfaces in its vicinity, and that these charge carriers are not electrons. These charge carriers are specifically smaller than electrons. They penetrate all materials and they go to extreme distances. And all of this material is covered very, very well with Jerry's book, and I've reprinted those parts in chapter 2 of my book so that my book on this whole discovery, which is the free energy secrets of cold electricity, is a complete document showing the entire development of the understanding of what effect Edwin Gray discovered, or rediscovered, or redeveloped. But if you move the image down a little bit here so we can see the top, what I do in this thing is I show the common features between Tesla's magnifying transmitter and Gray's cold electricity circuit, and I basically show that these are the common circuit elements of these two devices because one is a miniature of the other. And basically what we start with a source of high voltage direct current. We use that to charge a capacitor. In the spark gap, then we have two conditions which must be met, and one of them is that we make sure that the discharge is only in one direction and that we can control the pulse duration. That creates the explosion of electrostatic energy that is going to be captured on the grid here or in the secondary of Tesla's system. And this is what we call the preferred location for the electroradiant event. This phenomena actually backs up into the primary. It gets everywhere. We talk about a preferred location for this effect to be dealt with because you cannot get your hand on this. This is just all over the place. It leaks back to the primary. It goes all over the place. So, but we can create a situation whereby we can get a hold of a lot of it, and you can see what Gray did with the grid work over the high voltage anode. If you want to move the thing down a little bit, yeah. Then we go to the preferred method to intercept the event, and of course Gray did that immediately with his grids. As soon as he created the blast on his high voltage anode, he put grids all around it so that he could intercept it. And then he connected that to his preferred output, which in this case was an inductive load. And then he took the energy that he could capture from that and recycled energy back to his source. So this is, all of these features were also evident in Tesla's magnifying transmitter, except for the recycling thing. Tesla didn't care to recycle anything because he was running the whole thing on a big hydro dam. And he didn't need to recycle. So when I was able to correlate the photograph of Gray's machine, where he's standing before the stockholders, and those tubes down, now all of a sudden that made sense when I saw the patents that showed those structures, and then I had the photograph that showed those structures. Things started to come into place. Go ahead. Then it became obvious what was going on in this machine. Here we have the big, what I'm now calling an electro-radiant transceiver device, which is what the tube actually is. It's a device that is designed specifically to produce and capture, or broadcast and receive, this tremendous blast of etheric energy, which will charge surfaces around a unidirectional high voltage discharge. And obviously these machines have been unexplained for years, but basically what you've got is you've got your two capacitors here, and these things instantly discharge through the big cans, as they've always been called, and they meet in a spark gap over here. And when I show you what Bedini's done here, you'll completely understand what these things are.
Didn't you say Carl Baumann did that?
Yes. Oh, by the way, the developer of this, Paul Baumann, died earlier this year at age 85. So here we have, having put all the information out in the book, a number of people have stepped forward, including John Bedini, who visited Ed Gray in the early 80s and was shown everything after signing non-disclosure. Of course, all those documents are no longer in force, so he said, "What the heck, Peter? You've already done it. Here's the goods." So here is his drawing of what was going on in the conversion tube. Had a lot of details that I didn't have in the book, including the fact that the conversion tube grids are made of copper with holes drilled in them. This spark gap here, he's using silver-tipped points so that they last longer. The resistor is, what he calls a resistor, is actually just a large piece of carbon, which probably has very, very, very little resistance in it. But if you go back and look at what Tesla is talking about, Tesla says that carbon is the best conductor for this light ether energy. And so this probably helps characterize the right energy in the system. They're talking about here an electron flow. Gray's talking about ionization and all this kind of stuff. Nobody really understood that the charge carriers are actually smaller than electrons in this situation. This is not a standard electron or an ionization effect. You can see this in Tesla's patents, especially the one on method and apparatus for utilizing radiant energy, which is reprinted in my book. He goes to great detail to discuss the differences between what this effect is and the fundamental ideas of ionization when using electrons. So here's, we've published the basic details. The grids are connected in parallel. In other words, power is coming out of both of them. This shows a very neat kind of, staggered thing that, of course, isn't the way it was. This is because there's no way to line up all these holes and stuff, and the electroradiant event goes straight through the copper anyway, so it doesn't matter. Yeah?
Expression splitting the positive, is that part of all this?
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Splitting the positive simply means that basically when he discharges the high voltage thing from the positive of the capacitor, he's not discharging it to ground, he's discharging it back to the positive of the initial battery. And that's what he's talking about, what he calls splitting the positive. He's got a 3,000 volt differential, and it doesn't matter whether he discharges it back to plus 12 or 0. He can still create the electroradiant event, except that if he brings it back to plus 12, he's much more likely to produce a unidirectional impulse with no oscillations in it. This was the thing, the suppression of all reversals and all inconsistencies in that flow. What you want is one sharp bang like that in one direction. I can't even do it with my hand. But, you just got to go, that's it. And as soon as it stops, the ether, inertia in the ether has nowhere to go, and it explodes radially into and charges the other surfaces. Go ahead. So again, here is the basic circuit that John was shown. This was probably, again, the one-pole rotor in number 4, because he shows that he's firing one tube at 0 degrees, one tube at 120, and the other tube at 140 or 240. So he's doing this. He probably doesn't have this quite right, but there is a receiving capacitor between the inductors and the first battery. And John told me that the second capacitor here was of great contention between Gray and Richard Hackenberger. And there's every reason to believe that this capacitor here is actually used the same way a capacitor can be used in an AC system, and that is as a current limiter. The impulses coming out of here could be thousands of amps, and if you were dumping 1,000 amp pulses onto here, it would just, this thing would just fry. So by putting this extra capacitor in here, he could limit it to 100 amps, which would still just about blow the thing to hell. But 6,100 amp pulses a second is, give me a break. So we're pretty sure that what this capacitor did was act as a current limiter to, again, throw away energy because he was creating too much. And again, that's why he needed these overshoot spark gaps here, because when these things were just pumping out too much and he couldn't limit it enough, they would back out and blast over the overshoot gaps. If he didn't have this current limiting situation here, he probably would not have needed these. Go ahead. So after John was, can you move that down? Yeah. After John was shown all this stuff in the early 80s, he actually built one of these tubes and started working with a very high voltage system. And he actually started using the discharges from these as a healing device, because the energy coming out of it is very much unlike electricity and is very biocompatible. And but after a bunch of Samoan thugs pressed him against the wall in his own shop, he stopped doing anything, stopped even talking about having seen Gray or anything until about a month ago. Since I had already published most of the details of what was going on, he figured it was time for him to come forward too. So that's what I have to present on Gray right now. If anybody wants more information on the deeper details, I've gone into it. I've covered it deeply in my book and my other video. I highly recommend, if you're interested in understanding the complete phenomena, that you buy those materials. I don't want to spend a lot more time on going over what I've already spent months developing a complete communication on. And what I really like to do now is go on into the rest of the world of free energy, and where the work that Ed Gray did has inspired an awful lot of people and produced a tremendous lineage of other ideas. And the next speaker, Doug Konzen, is another pioneer following up on these ideas of the pulse motors and the recovery of these systems. And a lot of people have worked on this around the world. What I'd like to do is spend the rest of my time discussing some of this today, and then going on tomorrow and finishing But this was one of the first things that John Bedini did with his newfound knowledge. He wanted to see how much he could miniaturize these things. This is a design that he came up with here. The date is 1984. You can see this is within a few years of seeing Ed Gray. And what he's got is something very simple here. He's just got a wheel with magnets on it and a single inductor with 2 coils on it. And here's his basic, simple, self-triggering thing. No fancy commutators, no anything like that. All he's got here is 1 coil, triggers a transistor. When the magnet goes past the, he's using weak magnets and he's using loose coupling here. These 2 features are very important to understand Bedini systems. Weak magnets, loose coupling. So when this magnet slides past this inductor, what happens is it reverse biases this transistor and it opens these other transistors which drop the battery on the other coil. That gives the flywheel a repulsive pulse, and as soon as this coil is brought to saturation, that's turned off, because that's the maximum he can recover. The longer you leave it on after the field is established, that's energy lost. So you can't do that. These very short impulses are the key to the efficiencies of these systems. So here's what he does. Then he takes the inductive collapse from that coil and he runs it through a full wave bridge and back to the battery. Now these were some of his original systems. So for every pulse he would put in, he would get a pulse out. And this type of system did produce free energy. The free energy is mostly mechanical. There is an electrical loss in this system. Obviously, all we're doing here is, because we cannot recover, we've got voltage drops on our transistors, we've got voltage drops on our diode pack, and so the amount of energy, even if he can absolutely limit this pulse, this input pulse, to the bare minimum, he can probably only recover 85% of the electrical momentum to put that back on the battery in this type of circuit. So electrically, which is where everybody wants the free energy to show up, there isn't any, okay? However, in the motor section, here's what he's got. As the magnet approaches the iron, it's attracted. So he gets one free moment of mechanical energy as the permanent magnet approaches the iron core. Then when he kicks out the magnet, he gets another moment of mechanical work. This one he pays for, except he gets 85 cents back on his dollar. So what he's doing is he can give you an impulse that's worth, say, 85 cents mechanical. He can get his 85 cents back electrical. He gets one impulse for free for the magnet approaching the iron by itself, and the net gain is about $1.50 worth of mechanical energy on the wheel, and he's paying 15 cents for it. It's pretty good economy. Pretty good economy. Go ahead. This is another photograph off the web of the system, and you can see that his systems are just almost everything that you've seen him do. They're all basically the same. He's got big capacitor banks now, and I'll show you exactly how these things work. But essentially, most of the motors that you see that John's doing, if you want to go to the next one, I think, yeah, that's this one. This is an excellent system. This one doesn't use the simple self-triggering mechanism. This has a small circuit that's running Hall effects, sensors. This wheel here is the motor. It has 6 magnets in it and can turn 10,000 RPM. All of this stuff is just gear down stuff. so that he can end up with, at the end of all of this madness, he can get a wheel that's turning around once every 2 seconds. And he uses that to mechanically trigger when he dumps energy from his capacitors back to his batteries. And you can see, you can see here in the small inset that when he does that, when he discharges the capacitor back into the battery, he can actually do work with it at the same time. So we're going to talk about this, and this is a part of one of the most astonishing discoveries about how to do this in a very simple way. Go ahead. Of course, he's gotten a lot of press recently. This is an article written by Gene Manning. This really maddened a lot of people because they say, oh, John's, doing all these things and there's not telling us what he's really doing and all this kind of stuff. And of course, this little girl's life was turned upside down because she won every prize at the darn fair and maddened all the science teachers who stole the battery and all kinds of stuff. But her little motor, which was not altogether different than that very first diagram that I showed you that John put up in 1984, was able to run her little demonstration nonstop for 4 days at this science fair and really make the science guys mad because at the end the battery was still charged. And she was also running a small generator that was lighting an LED at the same time, proving she was producing mechanical and electrical output. And that damn battery just wouldn't go away. Okay. So again, here is the basic schematic. I think, Jerry, you've got this up on KeelyNet. This is no secrets here. You can see, pretty much what I explained. If you want to raise the image just a little bit, here you can see the very simple one transistor trigger. Over here you can see he's got a little extra coil here running a little light bulb. This is what the little girl did. There is very little recovery in this system. They didn't have a recovery mechanism. That when the big inductor collapses, it just puts little spikes back on the 9-volt alkaline. So this doesn't really even incorporate the most advanced recovery systems, but it's still enough. If you pulse an alkaline, they do really well. So you take one pulse out, you put one pulse back, and they actually do pretty well.
4,000 RPM.
Yeah, exactly. Keeping the battery charged and running a little light output from a separate generator coil. And believe me, the science teachers were out of their league with this little 10-year-old. Go ahead. Okay, so I don't know how many of you have seen this article. It's on the internet. It's on the Sightings site. If you want to push it down just a little bit, yeah, a little bit farther down. A little farther down. Yeah, it's from Jeff Wren's site on Sightings. Breakthrough, Bedini's brilliant formation of negative resistors in a battery. This is an article, 28 pages when you print it off the internet, written by Tom Bearden. Basically, this describes what John's doing as far as how he charges the battery back. And if you haven't read this article, please do. It's one of the most important things that's happened in the last million years because what John has discovered is that he can, by the way he charges the battery, he can make every lead-acid battery in the world, the standard kind that you've got in your car and everywhere else. There's billions of them on the planet. He can make that into a free energy machine. Go ahead. This is basically the energy economy of John's system. And it's very important that you understand exactly what John is doing because so many people out there try and do these things and they fail and they say, John's an idiot, John hasn't been telling us the truth, all this kind of stuff. None of those things are true. John has come up with some extraordinary developments and they're all real. I've seen them. He's demonstrated them for hours to me. I understand them and I'm about to explain them to you. So here's what's going on. Again, this is a 2-battery system. This is not a closed loop. Okay, he's got the magnet wheel, and he's got the two inductor coil. Again, he's got the single transistor trigger. He's got power from one battery. Okay, Now what he does is he takes, every time this thing comes by, he takes energy from this battery, charges this inductor just enough to maximize the magnetic repulsion there, and he takes the impulses out of there, runs them through a full wave bridge, and charges a cap. Anybody who knows anything about electronics knows that battery, inductor, control, diode pack, and cap is a DC to DC converter. There is nothing strange about this. The efficiency of this is probably 85 to 90%. Okay? He charges this cap at this point. If this is a lead acid battery, a full-size lead acid battery, this cap is going to be 120,000 microfarads, and he's going to charge it to 40 volts. Then once every 2 seconds, he's going to open this control system, which is a high amperage MOSFET trigger, and he's going to open that trigger for 100 microseconds, and he's going to dump that cap back onto a second battery. What this causes in the battery is an explosion of lead ions moving away from the positive plate back towards the charge. And typically what will happen is that on meters, this battery will go from its standard 12.6, it will jump to 18 volts with the imposition of an 80 amp pulse. At least that's what the meters are showing. They probably can't even show how high these things go. And then for the next 2 seconds, the voltage on the battery slowly drops back to about 14 volts. This causes a cold boil in the battery for the entire period of time. So John then puts another 100 microsecond impulse onto the battery. So basically he is applying energy to the battery 1/20,000th of the time.
And cold boiling is desulfation.
Cold boiling is desulfation, okay. It's healing the battery, and the battery charges continuously. Okay, this effect we're looking at, we haven't quantified it exactly, but we're pretty sure it's about 4 to 1 as far as how much we're putting in and how much energy is coming out of these caps in relationship to how many lead ions are moving in the battery. It's about 4 to 1. And after you charge the battery this way for about half an hour, you can disconnect the charger, and the battery will sit at 14.5 volts and cold boil for another 10 minutes without being attached to anything, which means it's still charging. There is no excess electricity in the circuit. There are nothing but losses. Okay, we take energy out of here, we end up here, we dump it on here. The free energy shows up in the battery. You don't deliver it to the battery, it shows up in the battery. You also get excess motor torque. Those are where the free energy shows up in John Bedini's systems. It is real, it is simple, it is here. Go ahead. What I want to do tomorrow is go on and explain how all of these things are related to the work of Bill Mueller. Here's a photograph I took of him about 2 weeks ago when I visited him. This is Gene Manning, who was also there. And I want to show how all these things relate to the work of Robert Adams, who's also doing work in this realm. And also I want to talk about Tom Bearden's MEG, which is really only a minor offshoot of the development of running transformers on permanent magnets. And also I'll be discussing what I call superelectrolysis, which is production of free hydrogen. So I hope you come back tomorrow. I'd be happy. What?
A few minutes for questions.
Oh, yeah. And if you've got any questions on what we've covered today, I can take them now.
If you have questions, come up to the microphone, please.
You know what the minimum rise time and fall time is for these really quick pulses before the effect shows up?
Nanoseconds. You really want this stuff fast. This is all of these effects. Everything Gray was doing, everything Bedini's doing, everything that you want here as very rapid rise time, very rapid collapse time. That's the key to the whole energy efficiency.
So the,
Pulsed DC is the door that you got to get through here.
And to generate that rise time, a vacuum tube or a semiconductor can do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can do it a lot of ways. You can do it with bipolars. It works better with MOSFETs.
Mm-hmm.
It works great with vacuum tubes. Of course, MOSFETs are the simplest. Well, I mean, MOSFETs are finicky too, but you know, solid state stuff is. You can do it with MOSFETs. When I tell you what Adams is doing with MOSFETs, it'll just really knock your socks off. But yeah, you can. There's a lot of simple ways. We've got fantastic tools that Tesla never had. And this stuff is totally accessible. I mean, don't think this stuff is complicated. I mean, Mueller's using computers and Hall effects and everything, and Bedini's doing the same thing with a single transistor. So don't get hung up on the various ways these guys are doing it.
Yes, I have a question about the charge carriers that you're referring to.
Yeah.
Where do you think they're coming from? Just space? Good answer.
You're taking a shower in them right now. They're here.
Great.
Yeah.
In comparing the the first devices you discussed, the Tesla and the Gray machines, you talked about a electrostatic transceiver and the effect that had. Does the Bedini device incorporate that effect also?
No. Okay. What Bedini told me and what Norm has told me and what Doug is going to show you is you don't need to go and do the electroradiant event to make these things work. However, if you want your gain to be 100 to 1, 200 to 1, that's the direction you need to go. You can do this stuff low voltage and you can get gain mechanisms without the electroradiant event. But when you want to get 80 horsepower, out of a system like this, it helps. So Gray did learn how to harness it, but it's not. But you can easily get systems that run 4, 5, 6 to 1 without it. Any other questions? Yeah.
Why is this technology so available? Why is it so suppressed? Why are scientists so against all of this so-called good free energy?
The real problem goes into, if you've seen my article on the web, it also came out in Nexus magazine called "Where in the World is All the Free Energy?" I've got it on the web called "The World of Free Energy." But basically, energy functions in the economy as natural capital. And natural capital is the same as gold in a mine, credit issued by a bank, or money printed by the government. And basically there are people on the planet who want to control all the capital. If, in other words, the Federal Reserve wants to be able to throttle the economy by lowering and raising interest rates, and they want that mechanism to be the fundamental capital regulator. But if I can just go to my neighbor and get more energy, I can raise capital without the Federal Reserve, and I don't have to pay interest and everything else. And this gets into control mechanisms on how the world is wired right now. And so there are very, very powerful forces who these things run counter to. There's also the real problem of national security. I have basically no sympathy for the bankers. God bless them. However, the government has real considerations. There's really nasty guys out there who really don't care about us. And if the United States government got up and simply said, "Hey, everybody in the world, free energy's here. It's simple. Just listen to these guys." Then you're going to have guys like Saddam, and other people, who really aren't nice guys, creating even more problems for us. And this is a real problem. This is not a conspiracy. There are real considerations to be dealt with here. We're in a fix. Okay, we're all in this mess. And power is handled in a specific way on this planet. You can think of it as evil, but it's that way anyway, so we got to deal with it. And the national security issues must be dealt with. Anybody who wants to circumvent that gets stopped, and that's the end of it.
The answer is put these motors in all the truckers. They control the economy. The truckers will not go, if the truckers stop, the economy stops. Put a motor in every truck, and the government cannot stop them.
Great. You put up the $1 billion for the conversion, and we'll do it. Thank you.
Oh, I had another question, if I could. Could this electroradiant effect be used as a super weapon? Absolutely. Like a big boom? Sure. You bet. So that's a problem too, isn't it?
What I'd like to do now is discuss a little bit about the work of Bill Mueller up in, he's in Penticton, Canada, BC. This is Bill and Gene Manning at Bill's house. I visited them about 3 weeks ago, so this is a recent picture that I took. And Bill showed me a tremendous amount about what he's doing there and some of the breakthroughs he's made in the last few years. Most of you know he's been working with pulsed motor generator systems from the late 70s. And if you want to go to the next one here, this is a model of a Ford Model T Magneto. And just to show you how brand new this technology is, this is the classic Tesla design. You can see this configuration in a lot of his patents from the early 1890s. Basically all you've got here is a sequence of magnets attached to a flywheel here, and these big coils that are sitting on the stator. And this is a very simple configuration and open loop. This device locks in place because the magnets are very highly attracted to the iron cores in the stator coils. So, but once you break free from that magnetic thing, then the thing pretty much just rolls as the attraction and repulsion forces kind of equalize out. But there is this kind of starting cogging motion that makes the thing hard to start. But even when it's turning, you know, about half of an RPM, this thing will easily produce spark gap voltages, just instantaneous voltage and amperage in this thing. And so this is, Bill looked at this and said, well, gosh, it would be easier to make this thing roll freely, since it already does basically roll freely, if I just took one of these magnets out and then evenly spaced the rest of them around so that only one was in a direct alignment at any given time, and then all the rest of them were slightly staggered in a roll, so it had he got rid of the cogging effect at the beginning and could use very powerful magnets that would be very highly attracted to his cores, and the thing would just roll freely all the way from start to finish. So that is the big secret of Bill Mueller's designs, just this one-off matching, one fewer magnet than he has coils, and so that the thing has very, very low starting torque. and all the same characteristics as the Ford Magneto. Go ahead. So he builds very big machines. This one's about 3.5 feet tall. It doesn't have all of the power systems in place. The rotor's about like this, very large. It weighs 175 pounds. This system is computer controlled, and he's running these modules here. Each contain power MOSFETs, Hall effect sensors, and all the electronics to trigger the MOSFETs, and with all the electronic package to handle the spikes and everything. The light bulbs are actually a ballast in the circuit, so when he applies more voltage, when he's speeding up the motor, what happens is that the light bulbs get really bright, and then as the thing comes up to speed, the light bulbs dim off again. So he's using the light bulbs as a load ballast until the thing comes up to speed. You can see he's collecting the output pulses in this system on these big capacitor banks and so on, and then he actually recycles this energy back into the input. There's a big computer control system here which feeds into this module so that as the thing fires, these lights go around and so on. And this model could have modules in each of these locations. There could be 2 more modules here, 2 more modules here, 1 there and 1 there, for I think a total of 10. So he's only got half the modules on this thing. But this is the one he's got in his house. He shows people. And I said he can take this thing up to speed and then turn off the power, and it will continue to produce power as it slows down. And it doesn't matter whether he's energized the magnets or recycling the energy or any of these things. It doesn't slow down any faster or slower, whether it's under load or whether it's not under load. And but he's got it configured so that it's not producing any excess energy that you can really notice. And I said, Bill, this thing isn't producing any free energy, is it? And he looks at me, he says, what do you think, I'm crazy to have a free energy machine in my house? But certainly this thing has remarkable capabilities, and he has it set up in these demonstrations so that it does not produce any obvious overt gains. Go ahead. But this is one of the most amazing things where he has gone. Back in 1986, when I first met him, he had already started working with met glass cores in these variable reluctance generators, and he noticed immediately when he switched from iron to met glass that he was getting about 4 times more electricity out of the coils than using iron. And this has to do with the fact that a configuration like this, when you have a wire wrapped around a core, that the voltage produced is based on the rate of change of the core. And of course, when you've got a material that can demagnetize very rapidly, such as met glass, you can get higher voltage spikes out of it. And according to Ohm's law, if you have higher voltage, of course, across the same resistance coil, you're going to get a bigger amperage charge as well. So he found that with the same kind of magnets, same RPMs, changing the core material, you could increase the output dramatically. So he was always on the lookout for these types of materials. But as met glass became more expensive, and he started realizing that met glass actually rusts, which makes it very problematic for long-term installations. He started looking around, and like a lot of people I know who are in the alternative energy field, they've also dabbled in what we'll call alternative mining processes. And he's up in the Okanagan Valley, and there's a lot of mining up there. And a number of people brought him a material from a placer gold mine, and they had classic black sand from a river process, and they asked him to separate the gold out. And so he showed them a basic magnetic separation process that allowed them to get the gold out, and they were happy to walk away with the gold. And he was left with the pile of black sand. And he started looking at this stuff and realized that it's a very interesting mixture of Fe3O4, Fe2O3, a wide variety of what are generally called, monatomic platinum group materials, as well as the whole host of rare earth trace things. He found this material in particular that he thinks part of the behavior of this has to do with a relatively significant zirconium fraction. But anyway, he started playing around with this stuff and noticed that he could magnetize this stuff very rapidly, and it would demagnetize completely. If you've ever played with black sand, you know that this is true. Many ferrites, such as the strontium ferrite, barium ferrite materials, which they've used in as radio antenna cores and things like this. These things can switch in the megahertz. This type of material actually can be magnetized to the same degree as iron, unlike a lot of the lower ceramic type ferrites. So he started casting this river magnetite in plastic cores and realized that it outperformed met glass in every way, since the river magnetite itself is a non-conductor of electricity, and but it's a very, very high conductor of magnetism, and it has a very, very high flux switching speed. He ended up with this material, which he now can cast in any form he wants just by pouring the river magnetite into a plastic goop and then pouring it into a mold any shape he wants, letting it set up. He ends up with this material here, which is his current core material. As you can see, he can make it into any shape. It's very hard. He can machine this stuff. He's using a plastic out of Germany that sets up like phenolic, and this stuff outperforms met glass. And there's absolutely no heating involved. This stuff will not produce any eddy currents in itself at all, regardless of how fast you switch the magnetic fields or how strongly you magnetize the stuff. And it's utterly outrageous. You can, for transformer cores or for motor cores or generator cores, there's really nothing better. And this stuff's being thrown away at thousands of mining operations around the world. It could be a very, very valuable material for all of these type of pulse motor generator systems. So I've got a little piece of this stuff here. I just cast the material in silicon glue, but you can see the thing looks like a cube of rubber, but it's highly magnetic and instantly demagnetizes. Go ahead, next. So this is how he winds his cores for his no back EMF generators. Remember, Doug was talking about winding the core. So if he wanted a strong motoring effect, if he wanted to kick the motor away, he wound the coils very close to the pole where he wanted it to give the maximum effect. And if you remember, well, the absolute inverse is also true. If you wind the coil like this on a core and you run the magnet past this way, all the current is down here, and your core partially insulates the lines of force going past, and so you can produce tremendous amounts of current in the coil output here with almost no recoil as the magnet moves forward past it. And this is how he makes his no back EMF generators that produce tremendous outputs with almost no physical drag. This is worth $1 zillion. This is worth $1 zillion. Go ahead. So how easy is this to manufacture? Well, he just figured, what the heck, print the coils on a circuit board, stack the circuit boards, drill a hole in the middle of it, pour his new core material in, and pop them out. This is an early prototype of a small motor generator system that's starting to be produced in Toronto right now. There's a company that's been formed. Paul Allen is one of the main backers, billionaire from Microsoft. The Canadian government's got $10 million into this thing. They're going to produce a small battery charger for laptop computers. Thing's about 3 inches by 4 inches. It plugs into the wall, and we'll be talking about what marketing strategies are working these days, but this project is going forward. The thing plugs into the wall, draws a few watts, spins the motor generator, and delivers a great deal of energy to the battery in your computer. Next. Okay. So those are the things that Bill Mueller is doing that I think are outrageous and beyond. I would like to now switch to Robert Adams. Just put these guys and their work next to each other. Again, they're working, all these guys have, Mueller and Bedini and Adams have been basically covering a great deal of the same ground over the last 30 years. Here's one of the first machines that Adams built in 1963. You can see the classic stuff. A lot of these configurations don't look a great deal different than what Doug Conzen is doing again. And of course, all of these things operate at unusual characteristics. But Robert Adams has been told over and over that people haven't been able to duplicate his work and all kinds of stuff. But very few people have seen pictures of his shop and the meticulous kind of work he does, the tremendous metering and everything, how he documents it. He's not much of an author. He's not much of a communicator. That's been his main problem. He is a brilliant scientist, and he has done spectacular work. You want to go to the next one here. These are just some early machines. Here's a system from 1997 showing the machine in early stages of, this is a 4-pole system. This is when it's newly finished, and here, years later, he's got it painted and he's got a little saw blade on it to demonstrate that this is actually a relatively powerful motor and can do a significant amount of work. Go ahead. Okay, here's another motor. Here he's got a tachometer on the thing. He meters this stuff. He does really excellent work. Here, down here is an early model of a pulse-driven induction heater. This heating mechanism is also was the kind of thing that all the people who have ever worked in these pulse motor systems have run into. And basically, if you have iron slugs in an aluminum plate, you get huge eddy currents in these things, and if you stand the iron plugs away from the aluminum and run magnets past it, the currents in the aluminum don't reflect back to the magnets again, and it goes back to the same configuration that Bill Mueller is using for his no back EMF generators. When the current is stepped back in these open loop magnetic systems, there's a tremendous insulation from the reaction torque of the current against the magnet moving past. So you can heat up the aluminum plate very rapidly, and with very small amounts of mechanical energy, the gain in that mechanism is over 10 to 1. So here Adams has a little pump motor being driven on the shaft. He's got pulsing magnets which drive the wheel. The wheel has the magnets. The magnets run past the aluminum plate that has the iron slugs in it, and so the thing runs on very small amounts of electricity and heats up the aluminum, which he uses then to heat water and runs it into a calorimeter to see what kind of heat he's producing. Go ahead. So he's in New Zealand. He's gone to a lot of little local shows in Auckland and other things like this, and presented these devices, some of which he calls his thermal motors. He's developed systems that not only run cold, but that can also run extremely hot. And since a great deal of the energy needs of this world are for heat production, he has spent a lot of time working on maximizing heat production as opposed to minimizing it. These are some of, here's a museum of different machines, made in different eras of his work. His work is utterly spectacular and extensive. And next slide. This is some of his current work right here. This is what we call the 3 calorimeter test stand. What you've got here is this machine here, which is one of his pulse thermal motor generator systems. It runs on about 300 volts, and he's chopping that input with power MOSFETs. He's got 3 calorimeters in this system. One of them is looking at the heat produced at the MOSFET input. One of them is looking at the stator heat for his thermal motor effect, and the other is looking at the heat dissipated in a resistive load. And in spite of the air cooling and everything else, he has to shut the system down in 2 minutes before it melts itself. Now, he's running, some of these are water calorimeters, as you can see, the tubes and all this kind of stuff. One of them is a mass calorimeter, which is looking at the temperature in an aluminum block. But basically, one of the first things, this system was built on my suggestion primarily because he reported to me a number of years ago that what he was seeing was that in spite of the fact that the MOSFET switching is supposed to be extremely efficient, and you probably many of you have seen this effect in even high power switching power supplies, like a 12 volt to 120 volt inverter that runs on power MOSFETs at say 5,000 cycles a second. What happens is that these things are claimed to be 93, 94% electrically efficient, and the entire housing is a heat sink. So the question is, what's going on? Well, Adams, God bless him, put the MOSFETs in a calorimeter and found out that the amount of heat he was getting out was of the same order of magnitude as the electricity that was getting through. Same order of magnitude. So just a MOSFET switch running at high speed is running at about 180% efficient, and it's giving us this ether separation effect where the heat is being separated from the voltage. And then what comes out to run his machine is what we call a light ether heavy form of electricity, because the warmth ether has been stripped out of it at the heat sinks. And this stuff runs his machines at extremely high efficiency and does not behave according to Ohm's law anymore. So all of these developments were in my background as I was cracking the secret of what Ed Gray had done, and when we saw the ether separation in the MOSFET high-speed switching here, it just dovetailed into all of these things. So we have multiple evidence that electricity really is this two-part phenomena. Like Steiner said, it consists at least of a warmth ether fraction and a light ether fraction, and the more you can strip the heat fraction out of it, the more it behaves like pure ether. Go ahead. So then, of course, these guys show up. This is John Christie and Lou Britz. They made news last March. The headline read, "World's First Free Energy Machine." Of course, they didn't get away with that for too long, but this machine obviously represents a tremendous amount of work. It is claimed to produce 1,000 watts continuous running itself, and which is 24 kilowatt hours a day, which is a darn good start on a home power plant. in spite of the fact that these guys weren't quite the first to come up with it. This system basically runs on the same principles that we're talking about. They've got magnets on the rotor. They're attracted to the cores. The cores are pulsed to create a repulsive blast, which creates the motoring effects. And so they've got a continuous. They capture the back EMF and then re-harness the mechanical in a generator cycle. So the whole thing acts as a big motor generator that produces 1,000 watts continuous. Go ahead. Same thing. Okay. Next thing I'd like to cover is the whole field of permanent magnet transformers. Certainly many people became aware of this for the first time when Tom Bearden started putting out the information on his MEG, the motionless electromagnetic generator. But actually the field of permanent magnet transformers is very broad, and the history goes back quite a ways. But here is a photograph from the JLN site on the internet, and where he's running a version of a MEG that he built, and basically I want to talk a little bit about the features here. First of all, that the output is about 2 to 1. You can see he's putting in about 3 watts, 3¼ watts, and getting about 6.5 out, and it's real. He's driving a load. This is a Met glass type of core. And all he has is trigger coils wound around the Met glass here. He's got the permanent magnet in here. The output coils are here. This is what would be called a bucking field gate mechanism. And even though this is probably the worst or the least efficient gating mechanism that you can use, you can still see that there's a gain. The power it produces is very nice. As you can see, the current and the voltage are in phase. Go ahead. So here's give me more of this. This is the hysteresis loop drawing for this type of core material, typically just generally called Met glass. There's various other names for it. These amorphous thin film core materials. This one right here, the one that's called longitudinal. What's this word here? Field. Okay, yeah, longitudinal field orientation. Basically, you can see what an incredibly narrow little baby this thing is, and what this graph suggests is that if I apply only this much magnetism to this thing, it orients this far and that rapidly. And this is the kind of hysteresis loop we're looking for. You can see how little energy is actually dissipated in the area of the curve, and this is the perfect kind of material to run permanent magnet transformers on, but it's also the perfect kind of material to run any of these pulse devices on. Now that we know that we can just cast river magnetite in plastic and create materials that behave this way, for a fraction of the cost of even buying iron lambs, this is definitely the way to go with all this stuff. You can get a lot more energy out for the energy in when you use these types of core materials. Okay, here's my favorite patent relating to permanent magnet transformers. It's the one by Frank Richardson. It was issued in 1979. Is it 79? 78? 78. Issued in 78, filed in 76. And this patent uses a ferrite core material.
We built this.
You built one. How did it work?
It was somewhat. Hang on one second.
We built it using standard ferrite, strontium ferrite, I think it was, and I had the cores and everything specially made. Spent about $1,000 just on getting the coils and the cores made, and it was not too efficient. And I suspect it was because of the switching speed of the material in the core. But I put out a little booklet on it called Theta Device and Other Free Energy Patents, and there's quite a large number of other patents in that booklet, other than this one, that preceded this. And
so yeah, this is not the first for sure.
Yeah, there was quite a few stuff, and in fact, I think I've got about 4 or 5 patents in that description discussing it. But it does work. And I'd like to know how much efficiency you get met glass versus the black sand core.
Yeah, this kind of stuff operates on a slightly different mechanism than the classic mag, because he's taking advantage of an orientation that's set in the material, which he can then switch and make these side legs act almost like magnetic transistors that draw the magnetism off into different shapes. If you want to go to the next.
So I want to explain something about this. This came from a friend of mine that went to Seattle. He said he met a free energy group. He said they were running their houses with this thing, and supposedly they were. He said that it puts out some kind of energy from it, like a radioactive energy, and they had to put it many feet away from the house, and they said it's supposed to last several hundred years because it actually decays the material over time. So
interesting.
And I said to Dan, he spent all that money, so I'm glad it's his money.
All your fault.
Yeah, right. Okay. So anyway, yeah, okay, good. So this gives a basic idea of how you can set up totally reversing magnetic loops in this thing, but it also gives a number of the basic parameters about how you do want to run a permanent magnet transformer. And so in this configuration here, we can see how it's set up. The permanent magnets are in the center here. He's got 2 side legs where he can shuttle the magnetic force off to create 2 possible preferred paths. One of them that looks like this one, and you can see the arrows of the flux like this, and then when all of the gates are off, the preferred path is actually an air return, and then when he turns this set of gates on, then you've got the preferred path through the core material like this, and you can see then that in these zones here, there's a complete reversal of the magnetic flux each flip-flop. So that's then where he puts his output coils here. Okay. So if we read a little bit from the patent text, we can say, it says, starting here, although the sequential excitation of the coils will create additive magnetic lines of force and thereby generate some output current in the output coils by mutual inductance or transformer action, the primary generation of output current will be caused by the shift of the lines of force of the permanent magnet field relative to the output windings. So what we can do is, what he's suggesting here is that it is possible to bias a permanent magnet field without any moving parts and create a transformer output from permanent magnets. For everybody who's ever been working on trying to produce a permanent magnet motor, this is an easier way to get energy out of a permanent magnet. Going down and reading this thing here, he says the power output from the system will depend upon the number of lines of force cutting the output coil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically what he says in this as you go through this is that each of these structures will have their own resonant frequency where the energy output is maximized, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking to find the output resonant speed of the phenomena, and it's going to be using the ferrite material that he suggests. That range is going to be anywhere from about 1,000 hertz to several million hertz. Now, it's just possible that the one you built, you just weren't running fast enough or something. You didn't find the resonant point. I don't know.
We ran it up to about 5 megahertz.
You did, okay.
Can
So you did try and find the resonant point. Okay. Anyway, these are the basic principles that need to be applied to any of these structures when you're building them. Go ahead. So here's another very important patent in this genre. This is the Derivas patent. And here he's basically just showing cores made out of standard Selectron. But what he's showing is that if you take sections of your core and actually put another small kind of loop with a coil on it so that you can create a cross flux across the main core that has the flux from the permanent magnet, you can divert the magnetic path to the opposite side where it's going to find a preferred path. And this is what we'll call cross flux gating, and this seems to be among the best ways to do it. Go ahead. Here we have another picture from the JLN site where they show a system using cross flux gating here, and when you read, this is their more advanced unit. The other one was a MEG 3, this is a MEG 4. They've switched to cross flux gating and they've gotten a lot more output from the devices. Again, if you use this type of, well, the other thing that's interesting here, okay, we're getting a better focus here. No wonder I couldn't read. I thought I was just going blind. There's a number of important features that are here that have to do with the efficiency of how to run these things, and that is, if you looked at the Derivas patent, you can see that his gates were fairly thick. And what Nowden has discovered is that no, these actual cross flux gates don't have to be very thick at all, and in fact the total amount of energy that it's going to take to magnetize this material, which actually does cross across this whole thing, the thinner you make it, the less energy it's going to take to saturate that material and create the cross flux gating mechanism. So you can create huge gates across these things with relatively small amounts of force from your input coils. The other thing is that when this gate goes off, the magnetism goes through the gate sideways, so there isn't a big back pulse in this coil from the magnetism in the main core, which is also important because a lot of these systems, like Frank Richardson's, they were having problems sometimes because when the gate would come on, the force would come through and you'd get this gigantic forward-going spike that would wreck your input circuitry. And you had to protect against that. In these types of situations, you're much more protected from that kind of thing. And so this basic type of configuration is moving absolutely in the right direction. When you switch off from a little core like this costing $1,000 with met glass, and you move to the core using the river magnetite in plastic, which you can pour into any shape you want for $20, all of a sudden these things start looking mighty good, mighty good. Go ahead. So here's a graph from some test results from the Nowden site again. You can see that as the voltage on the input increases, the efficiency of the device increases. And again, this has to do with probably the voltage spikes coming back out of the thing. Clearly, this one's showing about 5 to 1. Tom Bearden has reported in Infinite Energy magazine that he has 2 units operating at about 16 to 1, about 6 watts in, 96 watts out, and that they have run them up to about 100 to 1 before they melted. But this is definitely a viable free energy system, way of getting free electricity from permanent magnets. Okay. Next thing I'd like to discuss is what I call super efficient electrolysis. This is probably one of the most important technologies because it's going to be probably one of the most easily used as a transition technology from where we are now to where we have to go. So even the establishment knows that they're going to be moving towards a hydrogen fuel economy, and so the idea of running our cars on water is a lot less infrastructure changeover than tearing out our internal combustion engine and trying to replace it with a gray motor. The transition, if I could create a little cell in my car that produced hydrogen on the spot, that would be a lot more cost effective and put a lot more people in the loop more quickly. So the super efficient electrolysis processes are, I believe, going to be one of the main transition technologies. In looking at all the different possible ways of making hydrogen for free, I'd like to just start with the discussion of this patent. This is a patent by Samuel Friedman. It issued in 1957 and is called Process for Producing Lead-Zinc Alloys. Gosh, doesn't seem too related. Except that what this guy was doing, see, in the 50s, the big push was two things: aluminum and plastic. Okay, remember when we were young? You know, get into plastics, young man. Okay, but aluminum cookware and all kinds of stuff was coming out here. This was the big rage for the technology age of the 50s. And what Mr. Friedman was working on was the first practical low-temperature solder for aluminum repair. And so he came up with this amazing stuff, which he eventually brand named Chemalloy. And this is a special lead-zinc alloy. For those of you who know a little bit about metallurgy, lead and zinc really don't like each other much. If you try and combine them, you get this brittle mess that really doesn't do much. And he found a way of alloying these two metals and that produced some very, very interesting behaviors. Not only was it an absolutely superior... Okay, go ahead.
This was, I saw a free energy unit based on using these alloys.
Yeah.
It produced continuously about 1.5 volts, ran forever, did not need to be charged.
Exactly. I'm going to get to this. I'm going to show the whole thing, yeah. I'm going to go through this patent and show the whole thing. Basically what this alloy is made out of is there's absolutely nothing exceptional about it. It's made out of brass, aluminum, solder, silver, zinc, and nickel, and a waste product from copper manufacturing, typically called copper slag, which is a copper oxide, yellow sulfur, willow charcoal, and commercial muriatic acid. So it doesn't have any, strange, expensive components in it. And when you alloy all of these things together, you get a material that acts as an absolutely superior aluminum solder. You don't have to flux anything. You don't have to brush off the oxides or anything. It has the flux in it, the muriatic acid. It has all these things. It will bond to any of these metals because they're all in there. But if you take a good look at this material, gosh, if I was going to build a battery, what would I want in it? Well, gosh, zinc and copper, aluminum and carbon. I mean, all these metals are in every battery you've ever looked at, including lead. And so what he found was that, go ahead, next slide, that when this is the second patent that issued on the thing again, and after talking about the various objects of the patent here and about how fantastic an aluminum solder it is, we can get down to here, and it says another object is to provide metal alloys which in the presence of moisture cause the conversion of the latter into escapable hydrogen gas. Another object of the is to provide a metal alloy which electrifies and decomposes moisture on contact or during immersion. Okay, next slide, Jerry. This material had extremely unusual electrical properties. Here's the material. They sold it as an aluminum solder. You just buy these things. The stuff melts it. In spite of the fact that it has components in it that melt as high as 1200 degrees, the alloy itself melts at around 500. You just heat your aluminum up, stick the rod in, it just flows right in, right past all the oxides and everything. It still remains a more superior aluminum solder than anything that's on the market today. Go ahead. And here's some of the company literature. You can see improved fuel cell concepts, that it's able to produce electricity. Here he's showing, you know, liquid firecrackers, you know. It has a wide variety of astonishing uses. Go to the next slide. Here's an article that appeared in Science and Mechanics magazine by Samuel Friedman. He's trying to get people to be interested in this. Of course, the industry was trying to stonewall the blazes out of him, so he says, gosh, student science fairs. Sounds like Bedini. You know, basically what they found was that when you, here he's saying here, put chemalloy in plain water, produces about half a volt at 200 microamps. And, you know, one of these rods, every rod will produce half a volt at 200 microamps. Now, and when you think about that, that doesn't seem to be too much to write home about. It's just that the material acts holographically, and when you powderize it to what they call 1,000,000 particles per pound, every single particle will do exactly the same thing, about half a volt at 200 microamps, so that when they put the powder in water, it produces continuous production of hydrogen and oxygen. You can see here it says, to date, the capability of chemalloy to generate electricity in water has been observed for 7 continuous years, and no limit is known. The liquid, rather than the metal, is the substance which is consumed and must be replaced. So the material acts catalytically on water and is not acted upon at all by hydrogen or oxygen or plain water.
By changing the constituents of the metals, you can increase the efficiency dramatically.
Absolutely. So these are just the beginnings of this. Obviously, there's something, you know, I mean, the whole world could be running on free hydrogen. I mean, all you have to do is make this metal, and the stuff makes hydrogen forever at no cost. So that is by far and away the simplest form of what I call super electrolysis. Go ahead.
The guy in Wales that found the rock, put it in water and made cherries.
Yeah. No, I don't know anything about that one. I got a lot more to cover, so I got to keep going. Next process for production of free hydrogen is the Stan Meyer patent. Here, a lot of people have not understood really what Stan was doing. He says a method for obtaining the release of a fuel gas, including hydrogen and oxygen, from water, in which the water is processed as a dielectric medium in an electrical resonant circuit. Okay, next. And he shows the cell here, which is basically consists of concentric cylinders. And but here's the circuit, and basically there's really not much to it. He's saying he's putting 50% duty cycles pulses into this transformer and creating pulses that are going to go into the fuel cell, which he's designing to be a capacitor. Now, the obvious problem with this situation is this: he's using the word resonant here, like salt and pepper, all the way through. This is not a resonant circuit. This was part of the diversion about how to keep people from how to protect the idea without actually leading people to understand what was going on. And the proof that this is not a resonant circuit lies in the blocking diode. Oh gosh. So what you can see here is what he's really doing is this. This system works without electrolyte, so the purpose of it is he wants his water to have a fairly high resistance in it. And so here's what he's going to do. He's got these chokes. These chokes are very important because when he puts these inductive spikes on here and blocks them with the diode, what he's doing is he's charging this capacitor. And the resonant chokes are specifically to damp the voltage spikes that could prematurely set this thing off. So what he's doing is he's making sure that he can charge this capacitor with kind of soft pulses and pulse the thing up so he can get this capacitor to charge to the maximum degree before the dielectric material, in this case water, creates a catastrophic dielectric failure in the capacitor. At which point all the charge in the capacitor, all the voltage in the capacitor is converted to amps as it shorts out internally and utterly destroys the water it moves through and creates massive quantities of hydrogen and oxygen. As soon as it's out of the way, water rushes back in, the dielectric constant is again reestablished, and this is what happens. While that's happening, he waits and starts charging again. Go ahead, go to the next. Again, these types of drawings were used to confuse people. This, the idea of drawing these things as if these are increasingly large, resonant, pulses and everything. This is all a bunch of hooey. All he's doing is, just like any other voltage multiplier that's used in pulses, all you're looking at is a step ramp charge on the capacitor until it reaches catastrophic failure. That is the method of the Stanmeyer system. And it does produce massive amounts of gas for very small amounts of electricity in. To just reiterate that, Stanmeyer, of course, is now dead, but his brother-in-law went up to Canada and started a new company called XOGen, where they have gotten a new patent and are moving forward very rapidly on the commercialization of this technology. Here's their website, xogen.com. And you can see here XOGen's process most significant promise is that it will make it economical for hydrogen to replace carbon-based fuels and could conceivably reduce atmospheric pollution to a fraction of what it is today, et cetera, et cetera. Go ahead to the next thing. And here in the little frequently asked questions, we look at question number 1. What is the XOGen technology? XOGen Power Incorporated applied for worldwide patents based on the results of research which discovered a breakthrough technology that separates water into usable hydrogen and oxygen with a modest electrical input. The gases are generated on demand at the point required, which eliminates storage and provides transportable method of hydrogen generation. So again, here's a new company moving forward with the same basic technology. Will XOGen provide full disclosure of the technology? No, we won't. But doesn't matter. I just did. Go ahead. This company, Tathicus, is another Canada-based company. They just bought 20% of XOGen and are moving forward with this. Here it says, unlike generating hydrogen by electrolyzing water or steam reforming natural gas, the XOGen process is very cost efficient. It fundamentally shifts the economics of producing clean burning hydrogen. We know these are bold claims, blah, blah, blah. It works with tap water, etc. This technology is real, guys. All the chemistry books which say it takes more electricity to crack water than you can get out of it. Throw that book in the furnace and get some free BTUs out of it. Free energy. Here's the patent that XOGen is based on. You can see this is by Stephen Chambers. And again, the name of the patent, apparatus for producing orthohydrogen and parahydrogen. That's just more gobbledygook for we're not going to tell you what we're really doing. But they think this is going to protect them, and they're raising millions and millions and millions of dollars on it. Go ahead. So basically, the methods for what we call super efficient electrolysis, which can create unlimited amounts of free hydrogen for fuel. We've got 4 known methods. There probably are more. First one is Friedman's chemalloy. It absolutely works. The second one is the Meyer-XOGen process, where you use the electrolysis cell as a capacitor, which you charge until you reach a catastrophic breakdown of the dielectric material. at which point your voltage is converted to amperage and you get a gigantic blast of gas, and you can repeat this many times a second. And again, it goes back to Gray, it goes back to Tesla, it goes back to all of these things, that the way into these free energy systems is a unidirectional application of voltage, which then resolves as a free energy impulse of currents. This is exactly what's going on in the Meyer system. It's all unidirectional impulses. The third way, again, Bill Mueller is doing this. He's got his no-back EMF generators sitting on a big engine, which only take a few horsepower to turn it. He's taking all the electricity from that, creating hydrogen enough to run the engine, and plus the big loads. They're doing that at the industrial level. And of course, you can also take all your outputs from a permanent magnet transformer, dump that into an electrolysis cell of any type you want, and make free hydrogen. And also Bedini's system, where we showed that he was pulsing the light bulb when he was charging his battery. If you put an electrolysis cell in that zone, you can make hydrogen while you're charging your battery. Go ahead. Okay, let's talk a little bit about emerging markets. There are free energy systems reaching the market today, and as long as we get off this conspiracy thing and get off our ideas that this is a suppressed technology, things are changing in the world, and it's time for us to change with them. The emerging markets include, if you've got a mining operation out in the middle of Brazil and nobody really knows what you're doing, believe me, if you put a free energy generator up there, nobody's going to know.
Talking about the conspiracy thing and all the political, I didn't really realize how political this really was. This morning on the way over here, I heard on the news about the Kyoto Treaty on global warming and how Bush refused to sign it. Of course, we know what kind of financial interest Bush has. I'm just wondering, how are we going to get past that kind of politics with stuff like this?
We're not going to ask them for permission. If we don't ask, they can't say no. Absolutely. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission, really. Remote mining sites, remote things. Oil companies are actually going with big power plants based on Mueller systems, where they're running the onboard electric generation on oil, on big oil platforms and stuff. Instead of actually running them on petroleum, they're running them on super electrolysis. These things are going in now. Don't expect the government to sanction this. This is all under the rug. It's happening, but the government cannot admit it's happening, but they're not going to stop it anymore. If you've got an off-grid home site that's running on solar or wind power or mini hydro right now, you can easily put one of these systems behind all that, and as long as you've got a windmill sitting in your yard, who cares how you're really getting your electricity? And these types of things are ready to go right now. You could stick a Bedini battery charger in there and charge your batteries all night, and we call that the midnight solar technique. These things are showing up as battery chargers in the open market. The system that Bill Mueller is contracted with the Paul Allen Group, that's moving forward and is going into the market. The device does plug in. So it looks conventional, but operates non-conventional, and they're simply not discussing what the efficiency is. Space heaters, water heaters, these types of things, these heat-creating mechanisms are very, very powerful and give a tremendous energy gain. And as long as you make a water heater that we say, this is an electric water heater, you plug it in over here, draws 100 watts, gives you all the hot water you need for the rest of your life. That's the way these things are coming into the market. The marketing strategy is make it look conventional, Do not discuss what the efficiency of it is. Plug it in, just like, you know, the little things that make your house smell good. We're going to make this smell real good. And don't try and market anything that looks like a self-running system. Just forget about that. It can be a self-running system, but it has to look like a conventional system. If somebody comes and looks at it, it looks normal. The conventional, one of the beautiful things about the systems that Bill Mueller's putting in is that the engine, you know, that's driving this thing is about this big, the generator it's driving is about this big, and the machine that's giving them all the electricity for driving the engine with hydrogen is about this big. So you can just say, oh, well, that's the radiator.
No conductor in the extension cord.
Yeah, you know, and the thing is, you know, connected to the natural gas line, you know, and nobody knows that in the back room the valve's off. Who cares? So that's what's happening. This last thing, I'm not a doomsayer, but I would like to draw everyone's attention to one thing. This is a composite satellite radar image of the world, taken a couple of weeks ago, May 29th, and I'd just like to show you what's going on the planet right now with the weather. Now, there's a number of features here which are extremely disturbing. First of all, rain is falling on less than 5% of the planet. So this is among the conditions that free energy is entering the world today. It's a period of unprecedented potential instability. Free energy can be a stabilizing factor. It can also be an unstabilizing factor depending on how it's handled. But we're moving into a period of time where there's going to be a mad scramble for less and less and less food, water, and sense of security on a national level. And free energy is a wild card in this situation. So we who are at the forefront of this technology, it is incumbent upon us to act responsibly, recognize that all of these national governments are between a rock and a hard place, and it is up to us to not make it more difficult than it's already going to be for them. This technology is emerging all over the world. They know about all these super electrolysis and all this stuff over in Europe too. Gene Manning is going to be speaking at a conference in Switzerland next week, and they're very advanced over there as well. They know at least everything that I've just presented to you today. And it's happening. The cat is out of the bag. We've finally gotten to that point. God bless us all. We're going to need it. Any other questions? Thank you very much. That you can't do that with ordinary electricity, and that's what fixated my attention on this, that there was some genuine phenomena going on here that was unusual and important. And it had nothing to do with the motor. That's what was so important that stuck in my mind, and which is why I continued to search for the answers of what this technology was. If you want to go to the next slide. This was the second article that came out. Miracle no fuel electric engine can save public $35 billion a year in gasoline bills. And this talks about the motor. And just to show that this is a photograph again from May of 1973. And again here you can see in this thing he's got these pulleys off to these big generators. I'm going to show you a piece of information from Ed Gray on a test procedure that he did, and you can see exactly where the energy is coming from and what he's doing to get rid of energy. He's really got so much energy in this system that he's dumping it and throwing it away wherever it's coming in ways that he can't use it. But I just wanted to show you that essentially the way he closed the loop on this was with external generators, because most of the free energy showed up as mechanical energy. Go ahead to the next one. This is a sequence of proof sheets that I got from Tom Valentine, and just to show you a few of the images, here's Tom with his finger in the water with the light bulb. Here's Ed running the free energy circuit that doesn't have the motor in it. You can see in the background here in some of these photographs, all tons and tons of math on the chalkboard. They're just trying to figure out what the heck they've got, and they're trying to explain it to themselves using Ohm's law and all kinds of standard formulas, and hopelessly lost in all of this. Here's some of Here's the classic image of the repeller magnet here. The magnet's a couple feet off the ground. Here you can see the math on the board here behind Gray. He definitely knew how to do this, but they really had no idea how to explain it. Go ahead. Here we have, and you can see in this picture here and in this picture here, this is the number one machine that was built in 1961, and you can see with Ed's smile here, this is the one he's so proud of. This is the big breakthrough. And again, here's Fritz Lenz with the magnet repelling. This is an earlier version. Obviously, the repeller discs that Norm's showing here are a later version. They're much larger. But here they're popping magnets that are about the size of the ones that are in the motors. But you can see that there's a tremendous amount of work being put into these things even in the early years, and multiple models. Everything that you see in these photographs was confiscated by the DA's department in Los Angeles in 1974, and he never got any of these materials back. That's why almost everything that you've seen on the table up here looks different than a lot of these designs. He never got any of these materials back. Go ahead. So here's the basic cover sheet for the motor patent, and again down here in the schematic, if you want to run it up just a little bit here, he's basically showing that he's taking power out of one battery. He's running it through his switching circuit. He pulses these things through a transformer and charges a battery bank. Then he says he discharges these things through his magnets and puts it back in the batteries. And but there's this unusual little thing here he calls his magnetic harness floating static flux field, which of course nobody knew anything about. And the converters are just diodes. But basically, this patent protects the idea of the repeller motor and the collapse and the recapture of the collapse of the inductor when it's turned off, but does not discuss the circuit which actually powers the machine. So everybody got this patent. This issued in 1975, and of course, nobody could duplicate his technology from this because it doesn't produce cold electricity. Go ahead. Here's the picture that cracked it for me. I got this from Tom Valentine. You can lower it a little bit. But basically, this motor right here may well be the one we're looking at here. It very well could be this motor. And What you can see here is the circuitry that he ran all this thing on. This one says EMA 6, right there, the little plaque right there. He may have called it number 4 on the inside, whatever else, but anyway, this is what he considers. This was the first machine he built after he recovered from his first round of legal problems, after the DA couldn't make any of his investors press charges, and the charges of grand theft and fraud were all dropped because, of course, there wasn't any, except, of course, the DA stole everything. Should have charged themselves. This photograph was first printed in a magazine that Tom Valentine put out called Newsreel. It was in black and white form. But this photograph is one of the things that cracked the secret for me. And if we can go to the next thing here. Here we have a document from Ed Gray. You can lower it a little bit because there's space on the bottom here, yeah. And again, it says here, this is very important, and because we kept seeing these references to something else that was not mentioned in the motor patent. And here it says, development of a high voltage DC power for operation of the EMS motor incorporates a specialized high efficiency, high frequency inverter developed by Ed Gray Enterprises. And that its operating frequency is 6,000 cycles, etc., and that he can run other various types of appliances just with the inverter. So here again we have evidence that he was not just he's not just dumping capacitors into coils, and that's not the technique of the machine. Go ahead. Okay, make sure we get this over there. There we go. Okay, now here is a diagram by Ed Gray on the EV4 motor, EMA4 motor, which is this one, the one we've got here. This shows the energy economy of the system. Now, basically, he's claiming he's taking 1,584 watts out of the battery. Okay. He's cranking it up to his high voltage conversion, and he's storing it in his big caps over here. Then he is applying it to what he calls a high voltage ionization. Okay? Then from here, not from the motor, from here, the
I'd like to introduce Dr. Peter Lindemann for the KeelerNet conference. But first, Norman was talking specifically about you cannot close the loop on free energy machines. This is something John Bedini talks about. Everybody says the same thing. Think about this. If we're talking about tapping ether zero-point energy, and it's a pressure that's all around us, and it's uniform, except it pops in and out of existence in localized places, you're trying to concentrate that pressure in one area. So if you cannot close the loop because you must maintain a difference of potential, high to low. That's the only way you're going to get energy flow. So if you're standing in the local environment, it's all pressurized, so you'll never be able to close the loop unless you go far enough away where it's also a lower pressure, and then you'll be able to close the loop. So Dan calls this a gradient field, which is what that is, a gradient field, it's grayscale 1 to 100. Okay, Norman also mentioned the Dottle ring at 30,000 amps. That's an interesting connection between a medical device and a free energy machine. And that's what we do. We correlate and we network. And that you see there's linkages with all this mess. Okay, Peter's going to come up here and give his presentation on the gray power conversion tube and on the world of free energy. Peter Lindemann. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. If you can, I've pretty much got transparencies here for this presentation. What we want to do here, the first image here is to orient us all. No, that is the first image. First image here is a rephrase, my concept of President Bush's new national energy policy. But if we could see the light at the end of the tunnel, here's what it might look like. Push it down so we can see the top. There we go. This article appeared in the National Tatler. It was written by Tom Valentine in 1973 after he visited Ed Gray's laboratory in Van Nuys, California. And this article I ran into on a bus trip in Battle Creek, Michigan. I ended up personally seeing 2 copies of the National Tatler in my entire life, this issue and the one that had the follow-up article on Ed Gray. I considered that rather auspicious since I never saw the publication again. But what I wanted to, what was so important to me about this particular article was this section down in here, in this article here, where he's talking about this circuit that ran on cold electricity and where Tom Valentine was able to put his hand in a bucket of water with the light bulb and not get shocked. This obviously was something that was completely different and new. Battery. And then the output from this is what runs the inductors, which also go back to the battery. Go ahead. This is the second patent that is directly related to the first one. These 2 patents are about 4/5 of the wording in the body of these 2 patents is identical. This is efficient electrical conversion switching tube suitable for inductive loads, and it is the device that is meant to be run by his circuit. You want to go to the next one. This is the close-up of the internal workings of the conversion tube. And we'll go into exactly what this is, how it works, and what effect it captures that is the free energy. But essentially what he's doing is he's got an enclosure here. His DC capacitor discharges are coming from the hot plus here, entering the tube, jumping a spark gap here, going through what he calls a resistor, which happens to be just a piece of carbon, and then off to a diode and his the part of the circuit that controls when this fires. And then when he shuts this off, the voltage, there's an explosion of electrostatic energy around the high voltage electrode. And this, he picks up on these grids here, and these are wired out and run his motor. Go ahead. So as I studied this patent diagram, since this was the magic free energy thing, and this is where this is the circuit that allowed this component to produce free energy, I looked at this for hours and hours and hours trying to figure out what the heck was going on here, because it was totally foreign to me. And I started noticing some very unusual things about this, and so just to kind of help my own understanding, I started taking things away from this drawing that I knew weren't a part of the main idea of what needed to happen. So what I did was, the first thing I did was I took away the alternate possibility of running it on AC. And then I realized over here this was an interesting component which was designed to overcome overshoot. In other words, if the circuit produced too much energy, this was a kind of a safety spark gap mechanism that he put in there just to dump energy in case the system produced too much. Boy, what a problem. So, but there was also another very interesting thing about this particular component, and that is the fact that these lines are connected right through here, which I don't know if he did this on purpose just to goof with us or anything, but obviously if you take this diagram literally, there's no way to charge this cap, of course, because it's got a dead short around it. So I knew that in spite of the fact that that's the drawing we're given, the patent text clearly says that cap is being charged to 3,000 volts and being used to discharge across this gap and so on and so on. So I knew that there were irregularities presented here. So the other irregularity that I could see is that this is clearly the image of a triode, a vacuum triode. The device is described in the patent as a one-way gate. And of course there's nothing here that represents the grid and how to control the grid on this thing. So I just said there's too much missing. He cycled directly back to the battery. And he's only taking 672 watts from here back to the battery. Then this phenomena is what drives the motor. And from the motor, he's using this generator. He's driving a generator, and he's putting 396 watts back into the battery. And so this is where you get, he's taken 1,500 out, and he's putting about 1,000 back in. And this gives you this idea. See, he's even saying he's putting 68% back into the batteries for regeneration, okay? And that's where these ideas that, he can make the thing run 4 times longer and all this kind of stuff. But of course that completely ignores the fact that he's getting 4,000 watts mechanical out of over here. That's incidental. So whether or not this was an over-unity machine is not a mystery, it is not a controversy, it is not unknown. That's all not the way it is. Okay? And even in these low-power tests, this device was able to produce just about as much energy as he wanted. Basically, this figure is specifically reduced because when this motor is running at 3,600 RPM, and you can see that he's running 3 pulses per second, or 3 pulses per revolution, excuse me. Basically, these things were designed, his whole system, the recharge and the discharge of the conversion tubes were designed to run at 6,000 cycles a second, which is 360,000 impulses a minute. Okay? This is the rate at which he's producing 60 to 100 amp pulses that are going to go back on the battery. 6,000 a second, 6,100 amp pulses back to the battery. There isn't a battery known today that can handle that kind of, charging. And we'll see what he did, and this is why we know he was just throwing away energy all over the place, because he didn't really know how to recover it. It's not that the energy wasn't there. Go ahead. So I was constantly on the lookout for other patents that Ed Gray may have filed. I heard a rumor in 1997 that other patents had issued, but nobody knew the numbers and anything. And in the summer of 1999, the former, what's now Delphion Intellectual Property Network, which was at that point the IBM patent site, it was just upgrading their search engines, and I just said, Well, let's see how well it works. I'll just type in EV gray. And these two patents pop up. Here's the one, efficient power supply suitable for inductive loads. This is the circuit that he uses that powers the motor and everything else he did. Go ahead, next one. This is the enlargement of the circuit itself. And as you can see, he's got, he shows a number of things on here which are, of course, are superfluous, including plugging the thing into an AC line, which of course you can't recycle any energy if you're doing it that way. But he shows the two battery system here. One battery that he takes the power out of. He raises the voltage, rectifies, charges his capacitor here, discharges it through what this component is, which turns out to be his conversion tube, and back to the